My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, trust, and what happens when someone you're supposed to love decides to destroy you. For the past 4 years, every single Valentine's Day has been haunted by the same person, my mother-in-law, Patricia. But this year, everything reached a breaking point that I never saw coming, and the truth that emerged was so shocking, so deeply twisted, that it forced me to completely reimagine my entire family structure. Before we dive in, I need to ask something of you. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Here's what happened when I finally discovered the full extent of Patricia's deception and why this year's Valentine's Day became the day everything changed forever. I'm still processing it all, even now, as I sit here recording this. The emotional scars are real, the financial damage is quantifiable, but the psychological impact, that's something I'm still working through with my therapist every Tuesday afternoon in her cozy office in downtown Seattle. Let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. It was 2020 when I first married David Chen, my college sweetheart, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with. He was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely one of the most genuine people I'd ever met. But there was one massive complication in our otherwise perfect love story. Patricia, his mother, who had always kept a stranglehold on her son's life. I didn't realize this immediately. At first, Patricia seemed sweet, almost maternal toward me. She'd invite us over for Sunday dinners, bring us homemade lasagna, and ask about my work as a marketing consultant for a tech startup in Bellevue. She seemed supportive, engaged, and present. But looking back now, I can see that every kind gesture was calculated. Every dinner invitation was a reconnaissance mission. Every question about our finances was her gathering intel for something darker. The red flags were there, but I was too blinded by the hope that she'd eventually warm up to me to recognize what was really happening. Our first Valentine's Day together as a married couple should have been magical. David had planned everything meticulously. Reservations at Canlis, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Seattle, a place where you need to book months in advance and where the tasting menu cost nearly $400 per person. He'd bought me a diamond pendant from a jeweler in the Pike Place Market, something delicate and beautiful that caught the light just right. I remember feeling so loved, so cherished, like I was finally stepping into the life I'd always dreamed of. But at 6:47 p.m. on Valentine's Day 2021, everything fell apart. David got a phone call. His face went pale. "We have to go," he said, his voice shaking. "My mom's in the hospital. She's had an accident." Without hesitation, we canceled the reservation, no refund of course, and drove straight to Harborview Medical Center, where Patricia was supposedly being treated. When we arrived, she was sitting up in bed, completely fine, with barely a scratch on her. "Oh, you came," she said, smiling sweetly. "I must have overreacted about that fall. The doctor said I'm perfectly healthy." But David had already paid the cancellation fees. The evening was ruined, the magic was gone, and I remember feeling this sinking sensation in my stomach, this inexplicable dread that told me something was very wrong with this woman. The next year, Valentine's Day 2022 came around. We tried again. David booked a couples massage at the Fairmont's Orbic Hotel, followed by dinner at a French bistro we'd been dying to try. I remember doing my hair that morning, spending extra time on my makeup, wearing the red dress that David loved, the one that made me feel confident and beautiful and worthy of celebration. But at 4:30 p.m., Patricia called with a crisis. She'd lost her job at the accounting firm where she worked after 15 years, and she was having a complete breakdown. She was threatening to hurt herself. She needed us immediately. David, the compassionate son that he is, couldn't say no. We canceled again. The massage was lost, the dinner reservation went unfilled, and I sat at home watching David comfort his mother over the phone while I slowly began to understand that there was a pattern forming, something intentional and deliberate, but I couldn't prove it. I had no evidence. I just had a feeling, that gut-wrenching sensation that told me Patricia was orchestrating these disasters on purpose, and nobody believed me. Valentine's Day 2023 was perhaps the most painful because I had finally convinced myself that maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was so focused on Patricia's supposed sabotage that I was seeing patterns where none existed. David had seemed calm about the upcoming holiday, almost relieved that we were moving past this streak of bad luck, as he'd started calling it. We planned something low-key, a picnic in Discovery Park with homemade food I'd prepared, a bottle of Italian wine from a small vineyard in Walla Walla that we'd discovered on a weekend trip, and nothing that could possibly be disrupted or sabotaged. At least, that's what I thought. On the morning of Valentine's Day, as we were packing our picnic basket, I received an email from my bank. Someone had attempted to access my account from an unfamiliar IP address in Portland, Oregon, multiple times. The bank had flagged it as suspicious and frozen the transaction, but I was shaken. I checked my other accounts, my investment portfolio, my retirement savings, everything, and found that someone had successfully changed the security questions on my Amazon account, my Apple ID, and my email address. It took me 3 hours to regain access to everything, 3 hours of being on hold with customer service representatives, 3 hours of panic and fear and wondering who would want to steal my identity. David tried to minimize it. He said, "It could be anyone. Hackers target random people all the time. It doesn't mean anything." But it meant something to me. It meant someone close to me, someone with access to intimate details about my life, knew exactly which security questions to use, which backup emails to try, which passwords might work. I didn't have proof, but my intuition was screaming at me that Patricia was involved. By Valentine's Day 2024, I had reached a breaking point. I was exhausted from the cycle of hope and disappointment, tired of the gaslighting whenever I tried to explain my concerns to David, frustrated with the constant manipulation that seemed to permeate every family event. I'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Linda Patterson, at the Seattle Psychological Center, who specializes in family dynamics and boundary issues, and she had helped me understand that I wasn't crazy, that my feelings were valid, and that I needed to start documenting everything. So I did. I created a detailed log of every suspicious incident, every coincidental disaster that struck on or around Valentine's Day, every financial anomaly, every technical breach. I printed everything out, organized it chronologically, and prepared myself for a difficult conversation with my husband. But before I could have that conversation, something happened that would blow the entire situation wide open and expose a level of betrayal so profound that it would fundamentally alter my relationship with David and force us both to confront painful truths about his mother that we'd been avoiding for years. It was February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day 2024. I was at my office in Bellevue in a glass-walled conference room on the 23rd floor, preparing for a presentation on marketing automation software when my phone started buzzing with notifications, not one or two, dozens of them. Banking alerts, credit card fraud warnings. Someone was making purchases on my credit cards at multiple locations simultaneously. A Best Buy in Tacoma, a Nordstrom in the University District, a Tesla dealership in Redmond, and something called Patricia's Spa and Wellness Center in Shoreline. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out. I immediately called my bank and had all my cards frozen. Then I called David in a panic. "Something's happening," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone is using my accounts. Someone is stealing from us right now." David came and picked me up immediately, and we drove to the Seattle Police Department's West Precinct to file a report. That's when everything started to unravel. The police officer taking our report, Officer Marcus Williams, a kind man with a calm demeanor who clearly had seen this kind of thing before, started asking me detailed questions about who had access to my personal information, who knew my email password, who could access my phone, who had keys to our home. And as I answered each question, the picture became clearer and clearer. The only person who fit every single criterion was Patricia. She had visited our home dozens of times. She knew details about our finances because she was an accountant by profession and had once helped us organize our tax returns. She was David's mother and had made comments throughout the years about needing to help us manage our money better. She had been present when I logged into various accounts. She knew my middle name, which I used for security questions. She had the password to our Wi-Fi, which would give her access to our devices when she visited. Officer Williams leaned back in his chair and said something that would change everything. I'd like you to consider that the perpetrator might not be acting alone and might not be acting without motive. Has anyone in your family expressed resentment or a financial need? I looked at David and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, a flicker of recognition, a moment of truth that he'd been avoiding for years. My mom, David said quietly. She lost her job last year. She had medical bills. She's been asking us for money. We kept saying no. Everything clicked into place in that moment. The fake emergencies weren't designed to just ruin Valentine's Day. They were designed to keep us emotionally destabilized so we wouldn't notice the larger scheme of identity theft and financial fraud. Patricia had been systematically stealing from us for months, possibly longer. The police began an official investigation. Officer Williams obtained warrants to access phone records, internet activity logs, and financial statements. What they discovered was shocking. Patricia had accessed our home's computer system using a program that her cousin, Raymond, who worked in IT for a healthcare company in Pierce County, had helped her install remotely. She had captured screenshots of our passwords, our bank logins, and our email accounts. She had created a dummy email address that looked almost identical to mine, but with a single character difference, and she'd used that to reset passwords on multiple accounts. She had been slowly draining money from our accounts for nearly a year, not in huge lump sums that would trigger immediate alerts, but in smaller transactions that added up to over $37,000. $37,000. The night we found out the full extent of the theft, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to David, staring at the ceiling in our master bedroom in our Lake Forest Park home, a home we'd worked so hard to purchase, a home we were still paying a mortgage on, and I felt something inside me break. It wasn't anger, though anger would come later. It was a profound sense of violation, of betrayal, of having my trust weaponized against me. David was crying quietly beside me. I should have known, he kept saying. I should have seen this. She's my mother, and I didn't see what she was doing to you, to us. I wanted to comfort him, but I couldn't. I was too busy trying to process my own grief. The relationship I thought I had with my mother-in-law, even though it had been fraught, was now revealed to be entirely false. Every conversation had been a calculation. Every visit had been a reconnaissance mission. Every word of kindness had been a manipulation. The woman I thought I knew didn't exist. In her place was a predator, someone willing to exploit family bonds, willing to destroy the people closest to her, willing to commit felonies for money and control. The police arrested Patricia on February 15, 2024. 2 days after Valentine's Day at her apartment in SeaTac, just off International Boulevard. She was charged with identity theft, wire fraud, unauthorized computer access, and money laundering. Her cousin Raymond was also arrested for his role in providing the technical assistance. The arraignment was scheduled for March, and David and I had to decide whether we would cooperate fully with the prosecution or try to work something out with Patricia. I remember sitting in the prosecutor's office, Assistant DA Helen Torres, a woman with steel in her eyes and a commitment to justice that was inspiring, explaining our options to us. She could face up to 20 years in federal prison, Helen said matter-of-factly, but that's only if we have full cooperation from you both and a jury convicts her. She'll likely try to strike a plea deal. The question is whether you want her to accept responsibility for what she's done. David looked at me. "I don't know what to do," he said. "She's my mother." And that's when I realized that his loyalty to his biological family had been the one thing that enabled Patricia to hurt us so badly. His inability to set boundaries, his unwillingness to believe that his own mother could be capable of such betrayal, his constant desire to minimize and excuse her behavior, all of it had given her the permission she needed to continue her crimes. We decided to cooperate fully with the prosecution. David wrote a statement detailing his mother's history of manipulative behavior and boundary violations. I provided all the documentation I'd been keeping, along with the evidence that Officer Williams and his team had gathered. Our bank records were subpoenaed, our devices were examined by federal investigators, and through it all, Patricia maintained her innocence, claiming that Raymond had acted alone, that she had no idea what he was doing, that she was a victim of her cousin's greed and technological expertise. But the evidence was damning. Text messages between Patricia and Raymond discussed specific account credentials. Email chains showed Patricia directing Raymond to access particular accounts and withdraw specific amounts of money. Bank records showed the stolen funds being deposited into an account linked to Patricia's name. There was no reasonable doubt. The trial was scheduled for June 2024. In the months leading up to the trial, my life became an exercise in compartmentalization. During the day, I went to work, managed my marketing campaigns, attended client meetings, and presented quarterly reports on campaign performance metrics and return on investment. I worked with tools like HubSpot and Google Analytics to track consumer behavior. I researched emerging trends in artificial intelligence and machine learning applications for personalized marketing. I collaborated with teams spread across Washington and Oregon. And I did all of this while carrying the weight of knowing that my mother-in-law was sitting in a detention facility awaiting trial for stealing nearly $40,000 from my family. On nights and weekends, I met with lawyers, prepared for depositions, and tried to heal my marriage, a marriage that was now fractured in ways I wasn't sure could be repaired. David was struggling with guilt and shame. He felt responsible for not protecting me from his mother. He felt ashamed that his family had produced someone capable of such cruelty. He struggled with the fact that his mother was going to prison, and he wrestled with his own conflicted emotions about that reality. "Part of me is angry at her," he'd tell me late at night, "but part of me is still her son, and part of me is grieving, and I don't know how to reconcile those feelings." I understood. I really did. But I was also dealing with my own trauma, my own sense of violation, and my own need to be supported through this crisis. The disparity between what I needed and what David was able to give me created a chasm between us that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. The trial began on June 10, 2024, in the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle. Patricia took the stand and lied repeatedly under oath, swearing that she had no knowledge of the identity theft scheme, that Raymond had acted entirely independently, that she'd received money from Raymond as gifts and had no idea it was stolen. But then the prosecutor presented the emails, the text messages, the bank records. Patricia's composure cracked. She started crying, claiming that she needed the money because of her medical bills, her unemployment, her desperation. She tried to appeal to the jury's sympathy by discussing her difficult childhood, her struggles with mental health, her financial insecurity. But Helen Torres, the prosecutor, was relentless. She presented evidence of Patricia's deliberate planning, her specific targeting of my accounts, her continued attempts to access our information even after we'd changed passwords and implemented new security measures. Helen called character witnesses who testified to Patricia's manipulative nature and her history of creating family chaos. When David's sister, Michelle, who had decided to testify against her own mother, described years of Patricia's emotional abuse and her pattern of creating crises to maintain control over her children, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. 7 hours of agony. 7 hours of sitting in the courthouse hallway, not knowing what verdict would determine whether Patricia would face significant prison time or receive a lighter sentence. When the jury finally returned, the four women announced guilty verdicts on all counts: identity theft, wire fraud, unauthorized computer access, and money laundering. Patricia was convicted on all charges. The judge scheduled sentencing for August. In the weeks that followed, the impact of her conviction rippled through our family. Some relatives took Patricia's side, claiming that she was being treated unfairly, that family should help family, that we should have just given her money instead of sending her to prison. These relatives, cousins I'd spent holidays with, aunts I'd exchanged Christmas cards with, suddenly demanded that David cut me out of his life, that he do the right thing and support his mother despite her crimes. Other family members were furious with Patricia, relieved that she'd finally be held accountable for years of manipulation and abuse. David's sister, Michelle, became my closest confidant during this period. She understood what I was experiencing because she'd experienced it too. Years of Patricia's psychological manipulation designed to keep her children dependent and controllable. When Patricia's sentencing hearing came in August, I was prepared for whatever happened. I had written a victim impact statement that I intended to read in court, detailing the psychological trauma of identity theft, the violation of having my personal information stolen by someone I was supposed to trust, the financial burden of dealing with fraud and the legal process, and the impact on my marriage and my mental health. I'd spent weeks drafting and revising that statement with the help of my therapist and my lawyer. I wanted to be clear, articulate, and unflinching in my description of what Patricia had done to me. But on the morning of sentencing, David asked me to consider asking for leniency. "She's my mother," he said. "Even though she did these terrible things, I don't want her to spend decades in prison. Can we ask the judge for a reduced sentence?" The request devastated me. It felt like a betrayal of everything we'd been through, everything I'd endured, everything we'd fought for in court. It felt like David was asking me to prioritize Patricia's comfort over my own healing. "No," I told him firmly. "I won't ask for leniency. I'll read my victim impact statement as prepared, and the judge can determine an appropriate sentence based on the facts of the case. Your mother committed serious federal crimes. She needs to be held accountable." I could see the hurt in David's eyes, but I also saw understanding. He was beginning to recognize that protecting me meant not asking me to sacrifice my own justice for the sake of his family loyalty. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray Seattle afternoon, the kind of weather we have so often here, where the sky is white and it's impossible to tell if it's going to rain or not. Patricia stood before the judge, and the prosecutor presented evidence of her crimes and her lack of remorse. Helen Torres showed the emails where Patricia had explicitly directed Raymond to access my accounts. She played the voicemail from Patricia to Raymond where Patricia discussed how much money they could safely take without triggering fraud alerts. Then it was my turn. I stood at the podium and read my victim impact statement. I described the feeling of finding unauthorized charges on my credit cards. I explained the hours I'd spent on hold with banks and credit card companies, the stress of not knowing if my identity would continue to be compromised, the fear of not knowing which of my personal information had been accessed. I talked about the betrayal of discovering that the woman I'd tried so hard to build a relationship with had been using that relationship as a tool for exploitation. I described the impact on my marriage, the way David and I had to rebuild trust, not just with each other, but with the institution of family itself. I talked about the violation of having my financial security threatened by someone who should have been working to protect my well-being, not destroy it. And I made clear, in no uncertain terms, that Patricia's crimes had caused measurable harm that could not be undone by a light sentence or a sincere apology, because Patricia had never actually apologized. She'd only apologized for getting caught. The judge listened to everything. She considered the pre-sentence report, which detailed Patricia's employment history, her mental health evaluations, and her prior conduct. She reviewed the victim impact statement. She looked at the sentencing guidelines, which recommended between 18 to 24 months for this category of offense, and she imposed a sentence of 36 months, 3 years in federal prison, with restitution to be paid to David and me in the amount of $37,412. Patricia's face went white. She cried out that it was unfair, that she'd done her best, that she was being punished too harshly. The U.S. Marshals led her away in handcuffs. As I watched her disappear through the side door of the courtroom, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure. I don't think closure is a real thing when it comes to family betrayal. But I felt a sense that justice had been served, that accountability had been enforced, and that I had stood up for myself in a way that I desperately needed to do. The aftermath of sentencing was complicated. David and I had to decide whether our marriage could survive this crisis, whether we could rebuild the trust that Patricia had compromised, whether we could move forward together, or whether we needed to go our separate ways. We attended couples therapy with Dr. Richard Thompson, a marriage and family therapist who specialized in trauma and infidelity, not the sexual kind, but the emotional kind, the kind where one partner's family member has betrayed the trust of both partners. Through months of difficult conversations, we began to understand that Patricia's actions had exposed pre-existing vulnerabilities in our relationship. David had never successfully individuated from his mother. He had never set healthy boundaries with her. He had never prioritized our partnership above his loyalty to his family of origin. And I had never insisted that he do so. I had hoped that over time, with patience and love, his mother would change her behavior and our relationship would improve. But I had enabled his boundaryless behavior by accepting invitation after invitation, by trying to win her over, by not insisting on consequences when she violated my trust. We both bore responsibility for allowing her to maintain such close access to our lives and our information. But we also both recognized that we loved each other, that we'd built something real together, that we could move forward if we were both willing to change. David started attending individual therapy to work on his relationship with his mother and his own guilt and shame. He established firm boundaries. He could write letters to his mother while she was in prison, but he wouldn't visit her until at least 2 years into her sentence, and only then if she demonstrated genuine remorse and understanding of the harm she had caused. We reorganized all of our financial accounts. I moved my primary banking to a different institution. We implemented 2-factor authentication on all of our accounts. We installed a new security system in our home. We took out credit monitoring services from 3 different companies, LifeLock, Experian, and Equifax, to ensure that no one else could open new accounts in our names. We were diligent. We were thorough. We were traumatized, but we were determined not to be victimized. By Valentine's Day 2025, an entire year after the police investigation began, David and I were in a much better place. We weren't perfect. We still had moments where the trauma would resurface, where we'd get a financial alert and panic, where we'd remember something about the case that would trigger old pain. But we had rebuilt our marriage on a new foundation, a foundation of honesty, boundaries, and the understanding that protecting each other meant sometimes having to make difficult choices about family relationships. We decided to celebrate Valentine's Day quietly, at home, cooking dinner together in our kitchen, which had been renovated the year before with beautiful granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. We made pasta from scratch, opened a bottle of wine from a local winery in Yakima Valley, and we talked about the future, about what we wanted to build together, about our dreams, about our desire to eventually start a family, but not until we'd processed all of this trauma with professional help. And as we sat together on our couch after dinner, I realized that Valentine's Day had been reclaimed. It was no longer haunted by Patricia's betrayals. It was ours again. It had taken a journey through deception, fraud, and family trauma to get there, but we had arrived. The broader impact of Patricia's case extended beyond our immediate family. When the local news picked up the story, woman sentenced to 3 years for identity theft targeting daughter-in-law, it sparked conversations in the community about elder financial abuse, about the ways that trusted family members can exploit access to vulnerable people, about the importance of financial security and boundary setting. I was invited to speak at community forums organized by the Seattle Police Department and the FBI about protecting yourself from identity theft. I gave presentations at the local library about fraud prevention, attended by seniors and young adults alike, teaching people how to secure their accounts, how to monitor their credit reports, and how to recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. I realized that my story, as painful as it was, had the potential to help other people avoid the kind of situation that I'd endured. I became an advocate for financial literacy and fraud prevention, working with nonprofits like the AARP in Washington state to create educational materials about protecting yourself from predatory family members. David's sister, Michelle, and I grew closer through this experience. We started a small support group for people who had experienced betrayal by family members, meeting once a month at a community center in Shoreline to share our stories and support one another. There was Margaret, whose brother had stolen her identity when she was in her 60s. There was James, whose mother had spent his inheritance on gambling debts. There was Keisha, whose father had forged her name on mortgage documents to finance his business ventures. Everyone had a unique story, but we all shared the common thread of discovering that someone we loved and trusted had used that trust as a weapon. The group became a lifeline for many of us, a space where we could be honest about our anger and our grief, where we didn't have to pretend that family should automatically be forgiven, where we could acknowledge the reality that blood relations don't guarantee ethical behavior. 1 year after Patricia's sentencing, I sat down to write this account, to record this story, to share it with you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening from. I did this because I believe that stories matter. I believe that our experiences, no matter how painful or shameful they might feel, have the power to help other people. If my story prevents even one person from becoming a victim of identity theft, if it gives one person the courage to set healthy boundaries with a manipulative family member, if it helps one person understand that it's okay to protect yourself and your marriage, even when that protection comes at the cost of a family relationship, then everything I've endured will have meaning. Patricia is currently serving her sentence at a federal correctional facility in Spokane, Washington. I have no desire to maintain a relationship with her. When she's released, I hope she will have undergone genuine rehabilitation and will have developed empathy for the harm she caused. But I'm not counting on it. I've learned that we can't change other people. We can only change ourselves, set boundaries, and protect what we love. David and I are talking about the future more openly now. We're considering adoption. We're looking at houses in a different neighborhood, somewhere that doesn't carry the memories of Patricia's crimes. We're dreaming about building something new, something fresh, something that isn't haunted by betrayal. And on Valentine's Day, every year, we take time to celebrate not just our love for each other, but our love for ourselves, for the strength we've shown, for the boundaries we've set, for the healing we've pursued despite the pain. That's my story. That's what happened when family betrayal forced me to reckon with what I would and wouldn't accept in my life. That's how I learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That's how I discovered that the people you marry to become your primary family, and sometimes that means letting go of the people you were born with. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to hear this story. And if you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent.